Hi, I'm Martin Felsen. Welcome to City Design, where we explore how we shape cities and how cities shape us. This city history episode is the second on the Roman Empire, one of the greatest city builders ever. Last episode, we watched Rome turn the city into a system, a diagram and kit of parts that could be replicated again and again. The Roman city building system ran on new technology and new engineering to build across mountains, rivers, and the sea. This episode is about the design of Rome, a city of triumph and spectacle, but also of excess and human cost. Rome was built on 7 hills, and between the hills lay low, marshy ground, the leftover space nobody could easily defend. In Rome's earliest days, each hill had its own little village. The swampy valley between them was where people came to trade. One of Rome's earliest building accomplishments was draining the swamp. They did it with their oldest engineering marvel, which is still working in the city today, the Cloaca Maxima, the Great Sewer. And the dry ground it left behind became one of the most important public spaces in the ancient world, the Roman Forum. The Forum was where people in Rome met. The marketplace, the courthouse, the parliament, the temple, all crowded into one public square. Greece had kept these places apart. The Agora was for business, the Acropolis was for the gods. Rome fused them into a single space, and in the early centuries, that place was open to all. This was the Forum of the Republic, where Rome governed itself through elected officials and citizen assemblies, where Roman leaders were considered fellow citizens. A story that encapsulates this political phase of Rome is about a man named Cincinnatus. He was a farmer who had retired from public service. One day, with the Roman army surrounded by a hostile tribe, the Senate summoned Cincinnatus from his plow and asked him to assume total command and control to save the city. After achieving a swift victory in only 16 days, he relinquished power and returned home to farm. The title Cincinnatus had been given was dictator, which in Latin simply means the one who speaks. And in the Republic, the role of the dictator was temporary. Cincinnatus's resignation of authority was a model of civic leadership and service to the common good. And we can read these ideas in the shape of the early Forum. Even though the buildings are somewhat informally placed, and they don't always align, the place is open on every side, with views in every direction, with plenty of room to be seen and heard from many vantage points. This is a civic space, open and shared. The long halls around the Forum were called basilicas. The word means royal hall, but in Republican Rome, they were the opposite of royal. Covered halls for business and trade, courts, and public debate. The Republic lasted for several centuries, but as Rome's power and territory expanded, internal conflicts, even civil wars, broke out as citizens and families vied for power. A prominent military general of his time, Julius Caesar, built up his power and wealth by conquering and looting neighboring territories. After marching his army into Rome, Caesar named himself dictator for life, with no intention of giving the power back. To stop the Republic from collapsing into one-man rule, senators assassinated him. But in response to Caesar's death, his nephew and heir, Augustus, defeated the conspirators and established himself as the first Roman emperor. The Republic of Citizens had become a centralized empire of subjects. And we can watch that happen in the architecture itself. Caesar built a brand new forum right beside the old one. Then Augustus built his. Then later emperors built theirs, each grander than the last. And each new imperial forum was nothing like the Republican original. The Imperial Fora were closed and controlled, built on a strict central axis, walled off from the city around them, and symmetrically oriented toward a temple that couldn't be missed or argued with. The old forum was a space where citizens spoke with each other. Each new forum was a space that spoke to them. It didn't invite debate, it delivered a message. Your place is beneath the emperor and beneath Rome. Alongside Trajan's forum, Trajan's architect, Apollodorus, built something astonishingly modern. Trajan's Market, a great curved hall of brick and concrete, climbing the slope of a hill on several levels. Walk through it today, nearly 2,000 years later, and the building type is unmistakable. The vaulted arcades and central market hall, the levels stacked one above another, more than 150 shops lined up along an indoor street. Today, we just call it a shopping mall. Beside the market rose the Column of Trajan, 100 feet of carved marble spiraling up, illustrating the story of the emperor's conquests. Down at its base, Trajan himself, sacrificing by the Danube, beside his great bridge, also by the architect Apollodorus. This is architecture as message, a permanent advertisement for who's in charge. So many of our own public monuments and shopping centers still work with conventions established in antiquity. Where the Imperial Forum staged Roman power, the Roman temple staged something even larger, the cosmos itself. Let's start with how the Roman temple differs from a Greek one. A Greek temple, like the Parthenon, stands alone on its stepped platform, ringed by columns on all four sides. You walk around it. You approach it from any angle. It's a sculpture you circle. A Roman temple is front-facing. It's placed at the end of an enclosed square, up on a high podium, with a deep porch and a single staircase pulling you straight toward the door. You don't circle it. It draws you forward. And look closely at the columns. On a Greek temple, the columns hold the building up. On many Roman temples, the columns along the sides are half buried in the wall. They're not holding anything up. The wall is the structure. The columns are decoration. We can still see this in well-preserved temples like the Maison Carrée in Nimes. It's frontal, raised on a high podium, full columns across the front, half columns down the sides. The Western world has replicated this design again and again. Frontal, raised on a podium, full columns in front, decorative half columns down the sides, from Thomas Jefferson's state houses to the museums and courthouses of the modern city. But perhaps the most influential building in architectural history, and certainly one of the best preserved Roman monuments, is the Pantheon. The name says it all. Pan for all, Theon for the gods, a pagan temple to all the gods at once. The Romans carved the thick walls of the temple into a ring of niches, each one an altar for a different god. From the outside, the Pantheon resembles a more typical temple, but once through the porch columns and then through the towering bronze doors, the room opens to near perfect proportions. The void is a perfect sphere. The height of the dome equals its width, about 140 feet each way. And at the top, an aperture, a single round opening, nearly 30 feet across, open to the sky. The Romans called it the oculus, the eye. It's the building's only window. Rain falls through it. Sunlight pours through it as a bright disk that slowly slides across the interior all day, tracking time like a sundial. Standing inside the Pantheon is a little like standing under the open heavens, with a shaft of daylight connecting the city to the sky. So how was the Pantheon built? A dome that wide, in stone and concrete, with a hole open at the top. The Romans solved it by adjusting the dome as it ascends. At the base, where it springs from the walls, the dome is thick and heavy, its concrete packed with dense stone. Higher up, the shell grows thinner, the concrete mixed with lighter rock. And near the very top, around the open eye, the dome is thinnest of all, mixed with lighter volcanic pumice. The dome is heaviest where it's strongest, the lightest where it needs to be. To this day, the Pantheon is the largest dome of unreinforced concrete ever built. And then there are the coffers, those rows of sunken, stepped square panels rising up the dome's interior surface. They do two things at once. They carve away weight, hollowing out concrete the dome doesn't need, and they create an optical illusion. As the squares climb toward the center, they shrink, so the dome appears even taller and deeper and more vast than it actually is. This vastness is what the Romans were after. To the Romans, the sphere was the shape of the universe. They borrowed the idea from the Greeks. Plato had described a cosmos shaped like a perfect sphere. In his words, round as from a lathe. the most perfect figure there is. Stand under the dome, in the center of the floor, beneath the oculus, and the building provides a straight line up to the sky, what older cultures called the axis mundi, the axis of the world, the line that ties the earth to the heavens. The Roman architect Vitruvius believed the human body held the proportions of the cosmos, that a perfect body would fit inside both a circle and a square. 15 centuries later, Leonardo da Vinci drew that idea, the Vitruvian Man, a human body that fits inside both a circle and a square, the circle of the heavens, the square of the earth. Roman architecture took ideas too big to see, the cosmos, the gods, the order of the world, and built them at full scale. That's the Pantheon. Rome was the first city in history to hold 1 million people, and 1 million people need somewhere to go. Rome's answer was a new kind of building, a new kind of machine for the crowd, designed to hold tens of thousands of people and give them something interesting to do. Let's begin by exploring the Roman bath. To us today, a bath is a private, everyday thing. To a Roman who had no bath at home, the public baths were a daily ritual and among the most spectacular buildings in the city. Rome's first grand public baths were a gift to the people from Augustus's chief deputy, Agrippa, and they were free, or nearly free, to everyone. The emperors who followed competed to build them larger and larger. The greatest were the baths of Caracalla. This was the complex the size of a small neighborhood that could hold 1,600 bathers at once. And bathing was only part of the ritual. Romans moved through a sequence of spaces, room by room. They might start in the open-air yards, wrestling or playing ball. Then a hot room, the caldarium, thick with steam. Then the warm room, the tepidarium. And finally the frigidarium, a soaring cold water hall under colossal cross vaults 100 feet overhead. There were libraries, gardens, lecture rooms, shops, and food stalls. The Romans worshipped several gods, but the one many served most faithfully was the body, and the bath was its temple. Just like the Roman temple, the Roman bath became a model for important modern civic buildings. The Cold Hall of Caracalla became the model of the original Pennsylvania station in New York City. With the baths, Rome offered a crowd of strangers a way to feel calm and exalted at once. And the Romans understood something every ruler has known since. 1 million idle people are a potential political threat. So the state kept them busy, and it kept them fed. Every month, free grain went out to roughly 200,000 citizens, enough with their families to feed a large share of the city. And the calendar was packed with free public spectacles. The Romans had a phrase for this formula: bread and circuses. The circus wasn't a circus in our sense of the word. It was a racetrack, and the greatest of them all was the Circus Maximus. It's hard to overstate the scale. A track longer than 5 football fields, wrapped in tiers of seating that, by some accounts, held as many as 250,000 people, a quarter of the entire city, packed into one structure, roaring at once. Nothing that large would be built for spectators again for almost 2,000 years. What they came to see was chariot racing, and the Romans ran it like a modern professional sport. There were teams, they called them factions, each with its own colors and flags. Roman fans backed their rival teams in ways that would feel familiar today. A day at the races began with a parade. Down from the Capitoline Hill, through the Forum came the procession. The drivers, the officials, musicians, incense, and statues of the gods. The racers lined up in front of the sponsor of the games, who dropped a white cloth as flags dropped and the trumpet blew. The horses and chariots burst into action. The 4-horse chariots were relatively lightweight, a wooden frame and a driver. On the straights, they reached a speed of a galloping horse. At the turns, where the chariots crowded together, wheels could clip. A driver could be thrown. The Romans had a word for a crash, naufragium, literally a shipwreck. Each driver raced with a knife tucked into his belt because the reins were lashed around his body, and if he fell, his only hope was to cut himself loose before the horses dragged him under. And this was the tame entertainment by Roman standards. The real blood sport took place in a different building, the Colosseum. The structure began as a gift to the people from the Emperor Vespasian, built on the very spot where Emperor Nero had kept a private pleasure palace. Turning a tyrant's playground into a stadium for the public was exactly the point. Vespasian's son, Titus, opened the Colosseum in the year 80, with 100 straight days of games. It held perhaps 50,000 people, and it is, by design, two traditional Roman theaters joined face to face to make a complete oval. The Colosseum's facade is organized, story by story, by classical orders, Greek and Roman, columns and entablatures. But the columns aren't structural, they ornament the surface. The actual structure are tiers of arches and thick concrete walls. The orders are there to highlight the proportions, or, as Vitruvius would say, to create beauty and delight. Inside and on the sand, and the Latin word for sand is arena, Rome staged the gladiator games. Bloody spectacles pitting trained gladiators against condemned prisoners or wild animals shipped in from across the empire and slaughtered by the thousand. When the prisoners ran short, the wars supplied more, captives and animals by the shipload. This was mass killing as mass entertainment, performed for a cheering crowd of ordinary citizens. But the Colosseum gave us useful innovations too. Emptying a stadium of 50,000 people quickly and safely mattered then as much as it does now. So the Romans engineered the exits, a ring of passages and stairways that could drain the entire crowd in minutes. They gave those exits a colorful name, a vomitorium, from the Latin to spew. Not, despite the well-known myth, a room where Romans went to purge food. A vomitorium was the passage that disgorged crowd flow. Walk in or out of any modern stadium today, down the concrete ramps, funneled alongside thousands of strangers toward the exits, and you're moving through a vomitorium. The word is still in the architect's dictionary. So Rome had mastered the architecture of the crowd, but the crowd had to live somewhere, and that was something Rome struggled to get right. Most Romans didn't own a marble villa, but the wealthy lived in a domus, a private house turned inward around a courtyard with a shallow pool to catch the rain, heated floors in winter, running water, a garden, and a shrine. A beautiful machine for living. But few people lived this way. Most Romans were stacked in apartment blocks called insulae, the Latin word for islands. And islands they were. Tall, crowded buildings, often packed wall to wall, with shops on the ground floor and apartments piled above. By one ancient count, Rome had over 40,000 insulae and only a couple thousand private houses. We can still walk through these well-preserved insulae in Rome's seaport, Ostia. These brick apartment buildings still stand 2 and 3 stories tall, with thick walls, wide vaults, broad windows, shared staircases, and balconies. But life in a Roman insula wasn't easy. Many of Rome's engineering marvels, like aqueducts and sewers, mainly served the ground floor. Fresh water and drains rarely climbed above the base of the building, so the higher you lived, and the poor lived highest, the further you carried your water up and your waste back down by hand on the stairs. The streets below were chaotic. So many carts jammed the narrow lanes that Julius Caesar finally banned them from the city center during daylight, which solved the daytime gridlock by inventing a new problem. All night, the city rattled with cartwheels on stone. And not every insula was as solidly built as the brick and concrete ones at Ostia. Many were built fast and cheap by rent-seeking landlords. These insula were notorious for two things. They sometimes collapsed and they sometimes burned. In the year 64, a fire broke out near the Circus Maximus. It tore through the packed wooden city and burned on and off for over a week. When it was finally out, much of Rome was ash. The fire became a turning point in the history of cities because the Emperor Nero rebuilt Rome with a new set of rules. Building heights were capped. Streets had to be wider. Each building had to stand on its own walls, not share a wall with its neighbor, so fire couldn't leap from building to building, block to block. Fireproof materials like stone and brick were required, and every building had to have a covered porch facing the street, which doubled as a fire break. Rome already had, thanks to Augustus, the first full-time paid fire brigade, the Vigiles, thousands of men who patrolled the streets at night, watching for smoke. So now Rome had building heights, wider streets, fire separation between buildings, required fireproof materials, a public fire department. This is a building code, one of the first in history, born out of a Roman catastrophe. This is a lesson cities keep relearning. London burned in 1666. Like Rome, a city of timber and tight streets went up in flames. Each time, including after Chicago burned in 1871, what rose from the ashes was safer, more deliberately built, more modern than what had burned. This recurring pattern of city history is that we often build well only after we're forced to. The old story of the Roman Empire's decline is that Rome simply rotted, that it grew decadent and soft, and fell. But the truer story is more physical than that. In the year 330, the Emperor Constantine moved the capital east to a new city named after himself, Constantinople. The center of gravity shifted away from Rome. And yet, ancient Rome is still everywhere around us. The grid underlying our city, the arches of its bridges, the dome on its capital, the apartment blocks we live in, the stadium we cheer in, the building codes that keep us safe. All of it, our Roman inheritance. Thanks for watching City Design. See you next time as we keep exploring how we shape cities and how cities shape us.